central areas of England and Wales through this evening. That will clear to the southeast overnight, and behind it, it will turn much brighter or clearer and drier for much of the UK. However, frequent showers will start to move in across northwestern areas, and it is going to be quite a chilly start to the day on Wednesday. We could see locally a grass frost, but I think most of us just down into the low single figures rurally. And that could mean it's cold enough for some snow showers to fall over the high ground of Scotland, above around 600 metres, and plenty of showers across much of Scotland as well, particularly across northwestern areas. Across eastern Scotland, it should be that much drier, and across Northern Ireland as well. Still some brightness, and eastern parts of northern England should see a fairly bright start to the day. But the best of the sunshine tomorrow morning will be across parts of southern England and the southeast as well, where it should stay fairly dry and bright through much of the day. However, it is going to be a bit of a fresher day. Some cloud will bubble up across southern and central areas into the afternoon. There is a risk of showers across parts of Wales and into the Midlands, but I think the greatest risk is definitely across parts of northwest Scotland, where they'll be quite frequent, heavy as well, and there's a risk of thunderstorms. Temperatures only reaching 11 or 12 degrees in the north, and a little bit cooler as well in the south, only highs of around 16 or 17 degrees, which is a few degrees cooler than today. So definitely a fresher day to come tomorrow, and potentially quite an unsettled one across northern areas. It'll stay unsettled into the evening across the parts of the northwest. The theme continues into Wednesday, into Thursday and Friday, but it does look a little bit drier and warmer into the weekend.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays continue heading north up the M6 through Cheshire this evening, where everybody's been funnelled into the outside lane on that 4-lane stretch of the motorway from junction 18 to 19, midway between the Middlewich and Knutsford exits. Emergency repair works are taking place following a collision involving 5 lorries in the early hours of this morning, causing long queues of over an hour and a half back to 17 and on surrounding routes. And the entry slip road is also closed at junction 18. In Hertfordshire, the A1M is down to a single lane northbound 6 to 7, about a mile north of the Welland bypass. Emergency barrier repair works still continue. In Surrey, the A24 remains shut between North Cheam and Ewell, just on the London border, at the scene of an accident. And trains are suspended in southwest London, eastbound from Strawberry Hill to Wimbledon. It's problems to the signal, Southwestern tell us. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
We've got summer sewn up with an incredible trio of treats, and you could win them. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. Fun in the sun could be on us. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, good evening to you. It's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, the 80th anniversary of D-Day is almost upon us. Let's start then, shall we, by paying our respects. Also tonight, roll up, free social care for the elderly, everybody. If we win, say the Lib Dems. Sounds good, right? But is it realistic? Also, there's lots of talk right now about political revolt, so I'm asking you, what do you think is actually now the party of the working class, if any at all? Also, we're told it's the immigration election. We're being promised net zero migration from one party, caps by another, and so on and so forth. Who is actually going to fix this issue and how? Also tonight to be discussed, milkshakes. Who do you reckon's had one thrown right in their face? Before we get stuck into it all, let's cross live to the legend. There's Polly Middlehurst for tonight's 6 o'clock news.
The top story tonight, Rishi Sunak's facing another blow in his general election campaign as GB News can reveal that up to 6 Conservative candidates could switch to Reform UK. It follows Nigel Farage's decision to stand as a Reform candidate himself and lead the party. The candidates, including at least one former MP in the last Parliament, are in a race against time to make up their minds before the nomination deadline on Friday. One of the candidates weighing up whether or not to jump to Reform UK told us their mind could be made up by Rishi Sunak's performance in tonight's Leaders' Debate with Sir Keir Starmer. Meanwhile, in Essex, a 25-year-old woman has been arrested on suspicion of throwing a milkshake over Nigel Farage, where the Reform UK leader's been campaigning. The party chairman, Richard Tice, says they will not be bullied, while the Conservatives and Labour have both called it unacceptable. Comes just hours before we see Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the first televised debate of the general election campaign this evening. The economy, migration, defence and security will likely be points of contention. Yesterday, a YouGov poll suggested Labour's on course for a historic landslide with a 194-seat majority. Well, elsewhere on the campaign trail, Liberal Democrats have been promoting their plans for social care, while the Conservatives are pledging to give MPs a vote on the number of migrants who'll be allowed UK visas. But the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has refused to confirm the exact cap they'd put on worker and family visas if the Conservatives return to power.
If we are returned to government, we have committed to a scheme to cap the level of work-related visas. The Migration Advisory Committee will crunch the numbers to balance the economic needs of the country against the pressure on public services and suggest to the government a level.
James Cleverly. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the Conservatives are responsible for the rising numbers of migrants.
The Conservatives have let immigration get out of control. We've got record numbers of people coming to this country, and they've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
Coming as more than 200 migrants arrived in the UK on small boats this morning. Now, major hospitals in London have declared a critical incident after a cyber attack. It's led to the cancellation of operations and the loss of blood transfusions for patients. Staff at King's College Hospital and Guy's and St Thomas's, including the Royal Brompton and their primary care services, have all been told their sites have been hit by a major incident. Some sources telling senior representatives within the NHS that it is indeed a ransomware attack. Now, a group of British veterans has arrived in France to take part in commemorations marking the 80th anniversary of the Normandy landings. Earlier, there was an RAF flypast and crowds waving flags gathered on harbour walls in Portsmouth as they set off for France. They're carrying a commemorative torch with them from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which will form the centrepiece at a vigil tomorrow. George Chandler, who was on board a torpedo boat on D-Day, told GB News how it's affected him.
I was 19 at the time. These kids were younger than me, I know they were. Every time I talk to somebody about D-Day, I'm there.
For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that, Polly. I am Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co, and we're with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel, the former Conservative MP, Sir Bill Cash, and the Labour live peer, Lord Glassman. Two brand new faces to the show tonight. Gents, you are indeed very welcome, as are each and every one of you at home tonight, wherever you're watching or listening. You can get in touch all the usual ways. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can, of course, go to the website, gbnews.com/yoursay, and get in touch there. Or, of course, you can go on to Twitter or X and reach me there. Wherever you are, as I said, you're very, very welcome. But I will start by just picking up on that last story from the headlines there. Of course, the anniversary, the 80th anniversary, I should say, of D-Day is almost upon us. We've had some fantastic scenes today as veterans have departed from Portsmouth and crossed the Channel over to France. I'll be playing some of this footage as we discuss. But Sir Bill Cash, I want to bring you in first because you've got a wonderful story, actually, about your father. Tell us more.
Yes, I was born, actually, on the 10th of May 1940, the day that Hitler invaded France and Holland, and actually Churchill became Prime Minister. By 1944, my father had been doing his training in the Royal Artillery, and he was 25, and he went over...
This is your father on the screen?
That is my father there, indeed. And I can remember him because I think a photo shutter came down when he was killed, and I was actually given the telegram by a postman when it came through to her. My mother collapsed, you know, and it was completely shattered. And I, apparently, according to my grandmother, I said to my mother, "Don't worry, Mummy, I'll look after you."
Oh.
Which is rather sweet, but I can only say that was what my grandmother told me. But the reality was that my father got the Military Cross in the artillery, and he was fighting against the SS Panzer Division in the Tiger tanks around Caen and Hill 112, and he won the Military Cross in Malto. And I've got the letters from his other officers and the other men who he loved. And they wrote, he said he was a wonderful leader, and he was OP, which means he was at the front of the front of the front, and then he'd be in a tank or on a jeep, and he was directing the fire against these Panzer tanks, which actually had the most amazing armour. So anyway, they were going to get the OP one way or another because he's the person who was actually directing the artillery. And in fact, just to mention this, I'm going to D-Day, to the commemorations tomorrow with the British Legion, and I think the Prime Minister will be there and the King. I'm not quite sure, but I believe so. But my interest is primarily to be with the men, and I can only tell you this, that I'm hoping to take with me, and I've already arranged, and we're trying to fix the arrangements now, with somebody who puts roses on my father's grave, because he's buried at a place called Saint-Maurivieux near Caen, and he puts every single year he puts them there, and he arranged for the little, or not the little, but the village town of Fontaine-et-Touperfort to have a community centre, and I was asked to go over with my wife, which I did, and actually, funnily enough, his sergeant was still alive at the age of 93, and I took him over, and just to finish the story, we drove in through the gate, and my wife turned to me and she said, "Have you seen that?" And I thought I was having tea with the mayor. In fact, it was a community centre that they had built and called it the Paul Trevor Cash Community Centre, and it's up there now in Fontaine-et-Touperfort in Normandy.
What a story. There's your father again. I'll put him up on the screen.
It's Paul.
Paul.
I really honour him and his memory. These were amazing achievements.
They were astonishing people, and I watch the war films, and sometimes I think about the Spitfire pilots And I mean, I know just down the road from us, because I lived in Surrey, there was a squadron leader, and his son was called Rollerson. I remember the name, even though I was only 4 or 5. It's amazing what effect it had. But these people were the ones who saved us. And I say to people, please remember this, because they fought and died for our freedom and our democracy. And that is the key issue. And we got it back again. And I'll say that because I'm, quite frankly, a very strong Brexiteer, as some people may have gathered.
You're not. I thought you was a Remainer for a second.
You're not alone.
You know, I've got to say as well, look, you're seeing on the screen some of these veterans on that ferry going over to France. And, you know, you see them and they were passing over some reefs over the side, obviously in memory of some of their colleagues who, unfortunately, were not able to make that crossing. And just the emotion that so many of those veterans still feel all these years on, and you listen to some of their stories and they will talk about the fact they were just 18 years old, some of these people. You know, I mean, you think about, I don't know anyone that's got teenage children or grandchildren, but just cast your mind back, even to when you was 18, to be faced, as you're saying, at the very, very front line. It makes me go all goose-pimply. And of course, there was a torch being passed today as well to signify, essentially, the legacy and passing that legacy of remembrance and respect through the generations. And this is one of the challenges, because these people have sacrificed so much, and many of them, of course, sacrificed their tomorrow so we could have our today. And we've got to. And that's why I decided there's so much political tittle-tattle going on, and we'll come to that, don't worry. But I just wanted to start the programme just with a nod of respect, of course, to people like your father and all of the other veterans and everyone that's been kind of affected by these stories. And I think long may the conversations continue.
And we'd be governed by the Nazis now if they hadn't won, with the Americans and the others.
May their name be remembered forever. We've got to keep the torch alive in our hearts and in our culture.
We really do. I've got to say as well that one of my viewers has got in touch and said, hang on, Michelle, let me just get this straight. Whilst we've had those veterans, those heroes crossing the channel, please don't tell me simultaneously we've had the dinghies crossing the opposite direction. Well, I've just, you know, you've been hearing in the news, we have indeed had lots of crossings again today. We'll come on to that perhaps slightly later in the programme. But for now, thank you for your contributions on that. Keep your thoughts on that topic coming in. But I do want to touch on politics today. Let's cross live to Christopher Hope. He can bring us up to speed with the goings-on the campaign trail today. I believe that you're in Salford.
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, great to be on your show again. Yeah, I'm in Salford here, the home of Coronation Street, the longest-serving soap, one of the longest-serving soaps in the world, televised soaps, of course, made here in Manchester. But we're here for a different kind of drama tonight, a battle between Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer, who will be the best Prime Minister in the election 1 month ago from today, in July. Today's been quite a quiet day on the election trail because all of these two main party leaders have been getting ready for what will be a make-or-break session in front of the millions of viewers at 9 p.m. on ITV. But don't despair. GBNews is here in the spin room. We'll be talking to ministers, shadow ministers going into the debate and then coming out of it. So make sure you can be with us all the way till 9. Maybe be aware or follow on Twitter, but also watch GBNews, and then make sure you're following all the action from the spin room here. Big issue for Rishi Sunak. He's so far behind the polls, Michelle. He's got to take a lot of risk here. Sir Keir Starmer, he's got his Ming Vars strategy. The Ming Vars, of course, is his poll lead he's had for maybe a year or two now. Anything he says might wreck that, and really, I think Mr. Sunak's going to go all in to convince voters why they shouldn't risk everything on Sir Keir Starmer being Prime Minister. That's the intention. I think, in a sense, Rishi Sunak can't get too keen. He can't be trying to interrupt too much like he did with Liz Truss back in 2022 in those Tory leadership elections. Back then, he was accused of mansplaining against Liz Truss by being like kind of a preppy head boy. He's got to be more headmasterly, more authoritative drive to convince voters that don't risk all the kind of concern over the next 5 years with the uncertain world on an untried person like Sir Keir Starmer. So it's been quite quiet for the two main parties, but the noise has been elsewhere. We've seen, of course, Nigel Farage. He's been in Clacton, where he'll be standing as an MP at the general election. He had a milkshake thrown over him. Then the person who did that has been held by the police as we speak. And of course, I was back there for his last milkshaking in May in 2019 when he was on the Brexit Party bus, and he was very shaken up. I think it's very, very serious. Lots of people on social media, his critics, are laughing about it. It's not funny having things thrown at you in any part of public life. You don't know what's being thrown at you. It could be acid or some corrosive instance, difficult. But of course, the Lib Dems too, they've unveiled plans for social care by taxing bankers. But we're hearing more about that shortly in the programme.
Chris Hope, thank you very much for that. And he just gave it away, ladies and gents. I was asking you, who do you think managed to get milkshake today? He's just told you. I'll show you some footage of that a little bit later on. But before I do, the Lib Dems, they are promising the earth today on their political campaign trail. Let's look.
We also need to invest in social care. These are the care workers who are paid. We need to make sure they get a decent minimum wage, and we're saying £2 an hour above the national minimum wage at least, because we need more people to be supported in care, to look after loved ones who are either waiting to be discharged from hospital or so they don't have to go into hospital. If we do that, we rescue our NHS.
Maurice, look, if I had £1 for every single time in the run-up to an election campaign that someone's wheeled out this conversation about social care, promising we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other, nobody ever does anything, the situation never gets resolved, and the mess just continues for years to come. However, notwithstanding that, do you think that this solution is the one that finally sorts it all out?
No, not at all. You're right. Remember in 2017, Bill, Theresa May ran on lose your mind, lose your home. It was a catastrophe. She tried to engage with a conversation about the cost of social care, and it nearly killed you. I mean, and if that election had gone on, Jeremy Corbyn would be Prime Minister. Precisely on that issue, we're not capable of it. There's only one merit. I really am reluctant to acknowledge any merit in the Liberal Democrats, but I'll do one thing, which is this Royal College of Carers, is that we treat carers despicably. They're on short-term contracts, they're really badly paid, and it needs to be understood that those people who care for our parents, it's a vocation and a calling, and it should be treated as a vocation. That's the one aspect of this, but to talk to people about free social care is, I think, irresponsible.
Do you think more of us should be caring for our own parents?
Well, that's the key. I think
I agree with that.
Here is intergenerational family life. I think it should be much easier to build more rooms and caring facilities in your house. I think the planning laws should be absolutely changed, and that's where the investment should go in, so that families can care for their parents. This is a fundamental issue, and not this institutional care. And in COVID, we actually got a glimpse of what life is like in some of these care homes, and it was horrendous.
Bill?
Yes, I very much agree with what Lord Glassman has said. And also, there is a problem too, that sadly, we hear too many stories about abuse of elderly people in care homes, which are very, very serious problems indeed. I don't think that just throwing money at it, and there's no costing with this proposal at all that I'm aware of, so I'm not sure that it's being costed out. The motivation may well be understandable, but the real question is, frankly, whether, as we said just now, and I'm sure we'd agree about this, that the elderly people should be looked after primarily by their families. I mean, I'm 84 now, and I mean, okay, so I've been lucky in my life, but some people have not. And I know people, for example, who've got elderly relations who've got serious dementia. I know heroics that are going on, heroics looking after people who, when their parents can't cope and they have lost their touch with their families because of their mental condition, or that wonderful Rob issue that we looked at yesterday. That was amazing, that man's courage. But many people are not given that degree of courage, and the fact that the the parents who get dementia or whatever are looked after or not looked after by their parents is a real social issue, and we have to address it.
We certainly do. And I'm glad you mentioned Rob Burrow, because there was a really poignant message that he wanted to be played after he had passed away, and I'll bring that to you before the end of the programme. But just want to say, on the costings for this Lib Dem plan, he says there's going to be, Davey says, there's going to be an estimated £2.7 billion cost by 2028-2029. He says they would fund that by, I quote, reversing the tax cuts given to big banks by the Conservatives, he says. Look, I just want to say lots and lots of you are getting in touch about that first conversation about the D-Day, about the veterans. Many of you really appreciating that. Duncan says, my son served 9 years with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, but very sadly, we lost him to PTSD in 2021. He says, when I watch GB News just now about the veterans, I get upset. He says, but I also feel so proud. We must never, ever forget what all those heroes have done for us. He says, we owe our way of life to them all. Hear to that. It's actually made me feel very emotional, that, Duncan. I'm really sorry to hear that your son didn't get the help and care that he needed. We really do sometimes fail our veterans in this country, and I think that is one of our great nation's shames. Absolutely. Anyway, look, there's lots that I want to talk to you about after the break. Who do you think is the party now that supports the working class people? Is there one or not? I'll see you in 2.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales has said she's excited by a new report on prioritising early childhood, a cause, as we know, that she's closely associated with.
Yes, the task force findings claim that the UK could reap £45.5 billion in economic benefits if firms prioritise early childhood.
Well, let's talk about this now with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Good morning, Cameron.
Good morning.
I suppose it's characteristically Catherine, isn't it, to say she doesn't want to distract from this report by sort of people talking about her health. But we should start probably by saying she said she's not feeling well enough to come and talk about this in public, but sort of saying she's watching it, keeping a close eye from behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. This should not be seen as a return to work by the Princess of Wales, but I have been told she's A, read the report, and B, been briefed on it. But this all stems really from her work when she started being a working member of the royal family, where she was working closely with people suffering from addiction, mental health problems. And what she found is all of these issues tend to stem from a poor start in life, so the first 5 years of a child's life. So in January 2023, she set up Shaping Us, this awareness campaign for the early years. 2 months later, she convened the Business Task Force, so 8 members of big businesses across the UK, and over a generation, that could add, as they claim, more than £40 billion to the UK economy each year. We spoke to Peter Grigg yesterday. He's the chair of Home Starts UK, a charity which supports young families. Let's hear what he said about the Princess's role in this.
She's been a real driving force behind the report and everything it's done. And when we've spent time with the Royal Foundation, what it does, it reminds everyone that this is really important work and early childhood matters, that more businesses should get involved, that more charities are out there for people who want to do more to support families and children. So it's been a wonderful experience.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. GB News, Britain's election channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
people.
Hello, everybody. I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock here on Dewbs & Co. Alongside me tonight, two new faces to the programme. I have the former Conservative MP, Sir Bill Cash, and the Labour live peer, Lord Glassman. Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we started the programme reflecting on the soon anniversary of D-Day, 80th anniversary. One of my viewers, Duncan, got in touch and said about his son that served 9 years, tours of Afghan and Iraq. Very sadly, he says, he died due to PTSD in 2021. It really touched me, it did, and it spurred a conversation, actually, during the break. So, Bill Cash, I mean, that is a really upsetting
Very
story.
upsetting, it is.
Do you think the Conservatives have done enough for veterans in this country?
Well, Johnny Mercer stands out. He was actually rather rebellious as a minister, standing up for the veterans against all the establishment, if I can put it that way round. And my great friend Marc Francois, who, by the way, his own father was actually in Normandy on D-Day, believe it or not. Both of them have fought very, very strongly for the veterans who are quite often, as it was in fact after the war as well in the Second World War, abandoned after they'd done an amazing heroism. And this really upsets me. And I'm afraid that it's a reflection, in my opinion, of a sense of moral compassion, which people seem to have lost, which I think was much more...
Who's lost the sense of moral compassion?
Well, I think it's the people who believe that institutional care can substitute. It goes back to the conversation we had earlier about social care. Families and communities, the British Legion, the veteran societies, they constantly remind us of the fact that these people have in fact done immensely valuable service to the country, and they need to be supported. That is my absolute conviction.
But they're not getting that
But
support.
I don't think they are getting enough.
No, they're not.
I think a big issue here, Bill, is that we're becoming an increasingly contractual society. So when the contract's over, when you leave the army, but that kind of service is covenant.
That's what I mean.
It goes through the generation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that's the essential thing that we have to capture here. And the abandonment of these soldiers when
is
they
unbelievable.
come out of the army is despicable.
Yeah.
And we're all responsible here.
Yeah.
You know, there's got to be... I really respect what Johnny Mercer has done. There's been moves also on the Labour side.
But Johnny Mercer, if he was here, I'm sure that he would actually say he doesn't feel like he was perhaps supported enough.
He would certainly say that he wasn't supported because the government is contractual, utilitarian and merciless. And they don't have this sense of moral compassion. And I'm not going to pretend that it would be like that under Labour either in this case. But this is an issue that we have to work together across parties and across
It becomes
society.
too much of a tick-box society. That's the problem. Whereas, in fact, I mean...
But it goes even deeper. Once you've left the army, then they have no obligation to you, and that is completely wrong.
Well, we found this from reports that we've seen, and I think it's been going on for generations. And it even went on after the Second World War.
It went on after the First World War
and the First World War too.
That had particular...
Yeah, I can never understand it.
But it's absolutely, I said before the break, I think it's one of our nation's shames, the way we treat veterans. I mean, you can walk down the high street, I would probably argue, in most major cities, and you will see at least one person who describes themselves as a veteran on the streets of Britain. You often see them now with their army numbers, because unfortunately, as well, I've got to say, there is also quite a lot of despicable people that pretend to be veterans to try and muster up sympathy from helpful, kind, decent people as well. I do not like that at all.
And could I just, Michelle, add another point, which is post-traumatic disorder, if that's the correct expression.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
This is an actual consequence of being in war. These brave people go in there, and some people are luckily not affected as much as others are. But when they are affected, they need to be protected and looked after.
But I just want to say, like, when you talk about consequences of being in war, I have to say, I really do wish that politicians of all stripes would pack it in, leading us into unnecessary wars. We always seem to be stoking the fires in pretty much any conflict. We never seem to be leading the charge. How do we de-escalate things? How do we create peace? We seem to be desperately wanting to poke our nose into everyone's affairs all over the place.
Well, you've got to fight, and the Second World War as an example of that, where there was a lot of talk like yours. Why can't we have peace with Hitler? Why can't appeasement? Neville Chamberlain was part of that.
Munich, 1939.
You know, speak for England. In this case, Labour.
Oh, come on.
Absolutely.
Bring it to present day. We're pumping billions into Ukraine to prolong that conflict. What does the end of that conflict look like? No one even seems to know the answer to that.
We can talk about that.
We pump billions, well, not billions, perhaps, at this stage, into funding Israel, that situation there in Gaza. So I'm not talking about the dark days of World War II.
If I could just intervene for a second, actually, the problem in the case of the Second World War and the First World War, and again in relation to the Israeli war, is that there are people who start wars, and that is the problem. And war is tragic. I remember a famous poet talking about the pity of war. Yes, it's tragic, and it is absolutely appalling, the consequences, but it's the people who create the circumstances in which war becomes a matter of necessary self-defence, and that is the problem. It's a very complex question, and we don't want to overlook the fact that sometimes war is necessary as a matter of self-defence.
And I'm absolutely prepared, Michelle, to engage with you about Ukraine on this, because I think that is a very frightening prospect of Russian domination, which is absolutely contrary to democracy and liberty.
Just as Hitler did in relation to
but the W.H. Auden poem, do not say with such great zest to a young man ardent for distant glory, dulcis decorum est pro patria mori, we mustn't glorify war. That's completely right. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight.
I saw the scenes outside of the Eiffel Tower, actually. Macron, I think he was hinting perhaps at French soldiers potentially getting involved on the front line in Ukraine. I don't know if anyone saw the stunt, I mean, you can call it whatever you want, actually, of all those coffins that was displayed at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower. There'd been the French flag had been draped over them, and it had been inscribed with, this is essentially the French-Ukrainian soldiers. Is that what you want for those people to be on the front line in that war? I shall leave it to you guys to have the final say.
Michelle, that there aren't British soldiers in Ukraine, you'd be mistaken.
Yeah, well, there you go. What do you think to that? That's a conversation we could carry on and on and on, but there's other matters.
Willing to have that conversation.
We're always willing to have the tough conversations, but I think there's a really important conversation that we need to have in this country at the moment, which is when it comes to, I would say, one of the key players in this next election outcome as to who's going to go where and who's going to hold how much power. I would say that sits in the hands of the working class. There'll be many people. You will perhaps describe yourself as that watching this programme. Who will you vote for? Who do you feel is that party that represents you? One of my viewers has said, can you just start this conversation right at the beginning by defining what the working class is?
Well, working class people are people who depend on a wage for their living and on the whole have to leave the house and go out to work. We found out in COVID, you know, there was a whole class of people who could do their work from home on Zoom. No, not them. It's the people who had to leave the house and do things for other people. And that's working class. That's my working class.
Do you agree with that definition?
I think there's a lot of truth in this, and I would like to say, as a Conservative, that actually the Conservative Party in the 19th century actually began to think very hard about the working class. My own family included somebody called John Bright, who was actually a liberal statesman, and he was dedicated to the working class. And the first political organisation I belonged to was what is now regarded as a rather archaic organisation. It's been disbanded since, called the Primrose League. The Primrose League was the essence of conservative working class people, and Randolph Churchill founded an organisation in the 1880s, and do you know how many members it had by the year 1900? 2.5 million people, and most of them are what people would regard as working class. The thing is, it was about values, and it was about giving people democracy, giving them freedom, and improving their condition. And I want to pay tribute, actually, to those who created the cooperative movement, because that was also part of it. And if I may be allowed to say so, my family founded the Abbey National Building Society. That was a mutual, the National Provident, both of which were aimed not at They were aimed at mutuality, not just profit. And so this attitude, which I've been describing in this programme, to me is terribly important. It's about not just being focused on your own personal improvement. It's about trying to help other people as well. It's a community effort. And the whole of the working class question, which many people don't talk about now, does require serious attention. But I think it's a bit rich, actually, if I may say so, for some politicians to get out there and say, oh, it's the fault of the Conservative Party. Absolute nonsense. COVID, for example, and the amount of money, 400 billion, as I understand it, was paid in order to protect people during that period.
Only because the Tories took the decision to close the economy down.
Well, I think that's a very big issue, which we probably haven't got time to go in for now. I mean, I was living through it like you were, and people can have different views about this. What I can say
I know, but I just think when people say, oh, the Tories, we gave you such a safety net, and by the way, there'll be many self-employed people who will say that they were part of the excluded group that got nothing. But anyway, the Conservatives will say we helped all of the working people, but that help was only necessary because a decision was taken to literally close down the entire economy without, seemingly in my mind anyway, much consideration for the consequences, unintended albeit, of that decision.
Well, I think a lot of people would also argue that nobody really understood what COVID was until it had actually taken off, and when it did take off, the consequences for a lot of people who died in circumstances because nobody really understood exactly how the disease was being transmitted did lead to a lockdown, which some people do disagree with, other people regard it as essential.
Yeah, I know, but I would just argue that once you've locked a country down, then you reopen it again and up it pops again. Perhaps repeating that cycle over and over again is not necessarily the most fruitful look. After the break, I do want to carry this conversation on because Maurice, he's got some very important points that he wants to make on this topic. I'm absolutely sure of it. Nigel Farage as well. He has been speaking out about the needs for a political revolt. Also, as well, I want to look. I don't want to trivialise it anymore by calling it a milkshaking. I'll call it an assault, actually. Nigel Farage having a milkshake thrown in his face. I want to look at that. And I also want to explore comments that you made many years ago that caused some problems for you, where you said that the Labour Party should essentially embrace supporters of movements like the EDL. Let's explore that. Is that what needs to happen in modern day politics? I'll see you all in 2.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Some rain to come for parts of the southeast and the far northwest, but otherwise clear skies will develop this evening, and it's going to be a cold night. That's because this cold front is pushing south and eastwards through the rest of the evening, and behind it we've got much colder air arriving and clearer skies as well. So some rain at first this evening across the southeast, but it will turn much drier through the night. And I think most of us will see a dry and clear night away from the far northwest, where frequent, quite heavy showers will continue to push in through the night. It's going to be a much fresher start to the day tomorrow. We could be down into the low single figures rurally and the higher single figures for many towns and cities. But there will be a fair amount of sunshine around, particularly across eastern areas. So eastern Scotland could see a bright start to the day, but across the west there's a big difference across Scotland. Some frequent, very heavy, possibly thundery showers. There's a risk of some hail, possibly some hill snow across Scotland as well. Showers will continue to push into parts of northwest England, North Wales as well, but the further south and east you are, the more likely you are to stay dry through Wednesday. And I think it will stay fairly bright, particularly across the south coast into eastern areas of England as well through the day. There is a risk of the odd shower developing into more central areas of Wales, parts of the Midlands possibly by the afternoon, but it's really northern areas that will see the most frequent showers through Wednesday. But for most of us, it's going to be a much cooler day. Temperatures only reaching 11 or 12 degrees across northern areas, 16 or 17 across the south. It will still feel fairly pleasant in the sunshine across the south. But for many of us, a cold northwesterly breeze, and that will continue as we head into Thursday as well. Another very similar day, a fresh start with showers moving in from the north and west, staying much drier though across the south and the east. Still showers to come for northern areas on Friday, but by Saturday it looks much drier and brighter and a little bit warmer.
The latest GB News travel. Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with your latest. The M80 is being held in Falkirk in both directions from junction 8 to 9. This is just south of the M9 where a police investigation is getting underway, causing queues back towards Bannockburn. And the M6 is down to a single lane heading north through Cheshire. 18 to 19 between Middlewich and Knutsford. Emergency repair works are still underway after 5 lorries were involved in an accident in the early hours of this morning, causing long queues of well over an hour and a half all the way back to 17 and on surrounding routes. And the entry slip road is also closed at junction 18 at the A54. And if you're heading south of Birmingham city centre, the A38 is closed off Holloway Circus due to a demonstration. Queues back to Dartmouth Circus. The A1M down to a single lane again today, heading north through Hertfordshire 6 to 7, about a mile north of Welling. Emergency barrier repair works are taking place. The clockwise M25 partly blocks in Kent to the M26. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Hello there, welcome back. Michelle Dewberry till 7. Former Conservative MP Sir Bill Cash and Labour Life Peer Lord Glassman alongside me. I want to carry on this conversation then. Who is actually now at the party for the working class, if indeed there's any party for them? You might even say that there is not. You said some comments a few years ago where, I mean, because many people will say you were one of the architects of what became known as Blue Labour. You were then saying that you should, as a party, extend arms to people like supporters of the EDL, etc. It caused you a lot of trouble, didn't it?
A lot of trouble, and was obviously polarised and misunderstood. But my point was, if you abandon and hate working class people and don't address the concerns that they have about their lives, then you're no longer a Labour Party, you're no longer a Socialist Party. I mean, all over Europe in the 30s, they did this popular front, getting together the communists, the socialists, the liberals against the fascists, and it failed in every single case. And the Labour movement, my party, the tradition that I work within, is an absolutely unique and fantastic thing. So what Bill was talking about, the cooperatives, the burial societies, so that working class people wouldn't be abandoned to a pauper's grave, that they built a dignity of death was a reflection of the dignity of their labour and their lives, and that spread to other areas, to education, to the issue of mutual support.
And insurance as well.
A massively important aspect. But it's a long story, Michelle. Over a period of time, we just talked about D-Day. An enormous point of pride for my party is that when the British people voted in 1945, they had no hesitation about supporting Attlee and Bevin and those who worked in what must be the greatest government bill, which was the War Cabinet, which was an astonishing government, with Churchill and Attlee and Bevin and Morrison. So my party grew out of the working class, for the working class, and it was a mixture of conservative and radical. Now, what's happened over the years is that increasingly the policy people and people like me, academics and intellectuals, took it over. So it lost its distinctive paradoxical form, by which I mean that it became more and more liberal and progressive, which led to an estrangement. And we saw that when I was talking after the new Labour government, which assumed that the working class didn't matter, and Brown was part of that.
Yeah, with his Gillian Duffy bigot comment.
Yeah. So I was saying, don't despise and abandon working class people. They are our leaders, they are our hope, and they are the hope of our country.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely sensible what you said.
Yeah, so I wasn't talking to the leaders. I was saying, if there's EDL supporters, you've got to engage them, and you've got to engage people in building a broad-based coalition. And if you do that, you have a much better politics. Now, the issue in this election that has been going on is that all the assumptions of globalisation are false. They assume that nation-states didn't matter. They assumed that technology would erode borders. And they assumed that working-class people didn't matter, that we had to go for... Look, when I went 1979, when I went to university, 8% went to university, 50% did vocational training. Now, 8% do vocational training and 50%. It's all wrong. You've got to honour work. You've got to honour the people. Look, in COVID you were talking about, there was one moment at the beginning where suddenly the invisible became visible, where people started applauding bus drivers, applauding shelf stackers. What happened to that? That insight, suddenly we recognise how we depend on
the NHS workers.
And people who go out to work for their living.
Well, this is very important.
Don't hide
Let me
behind
ask
their
you this, Bill, because on my website, my viewers are getting in touch with myself and each other. Many people are saying the party that represents the working class is Reform.
No, I don't subscribe to that, actually, I'm afraid. This is a misunderstanding of what's going on. And if I just briefly give you a personal insight, I was, as I said, I'm 84. I was brought up in the post-war period. We'd been bombed and all that, and my father had been killed, and we moved to Sheffield. And when I was in Sheffield, we actually had... I grew up and used to play cricket and rugby, and I used to play with miners and steel workers. I had real love for these people, the miners, and that's what led me to end up as being one of the advocates of the miners during the miners' strike. I wasn't on the side of the NUM so much as the UDM, but because I understood the nature of the work that they did and how important that was in society, it made me very, very conscious and very supportive of the working class people that I used to grow up with.
Yeah, but in present day now, there is a huge amount of working class people that either A, work votes because they feel entirely disenfranchised from the whole thing, quite frankly, or B, they are desperate for an alternative, and they do see that a party like Reform, for example, would be the answer to their political prayers.
Well,
there's talk about Tory defections, perhaps, over to that Reform Party as well. You've also seen the situation, of course, with Lee Anderson.
Lee, of course, was a great friend of mine and still is, I hope, because he's a great man in his own way. And I say that. I did say to him, I was obviously unhappy that he moved across to Reform. But let me just say this. Actually, I'm afraid that the question of what is going to happen in this general election is very much in the hands of some of the people who yet haven't made up their minds, and there are more of those than people might appreciate. And even if they've said they've made up their minds, just watch this space, because actually,
but the polls haven't moved, though.
Well,
the polls since the election.
No, because what I'm about to say hasn't been explained as well as perhaps it could be, and it's very simple. If you want to change legislation to improve the lot of people. You have to be able to have a majority in the House of Commons.
You've had a majority in the House of Commons.
No, listen, if I may just say this. Actually, we're talking about this general election and what's going to happen. My view is that Brexit has actually achieved far more than people imagine, because it's given back the freedom and self-government to the people of this country, so that when they vote, they can have their own MPs, whether they're Labour or Conservative or any other party. But you have to have a majority in the House of Commons to pass legislation. I'm afraid the Reform have no prospect whatsoever, and it's very dangerous, this.
Well, if you listen to Reform...
wait a minute, if I may just finish. You have to produce, you have to have a majority to pass a single word of legislation, and I'm afraid that's not going to happen with Reform.
Well, if you were to listen to Nigel Farage, he would say that it's essentially a done deal, that the Labour Party have already won, so now he wants them to become the opposition.
I think he's talking nonsense.
He's going to have strong opinions on that, I can tell you. We'll carry on the conversation with the break. I'm sure you will at home. Let's continue it as well in 2 minutes. I'll see you then. I also want to pay respect as well to Rob Burrow. We mentioned that at the start of the programme, and I'll speak about immigration too. See ya.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is about the Biden administration kind of resisting calls from Harry's lawyers whether or not this ongoing thing about releasing his visa records over the alleged, in Spare, he admitted to taking, remember his memoir Spare? He admitted to taking cocaine, marijuana and magic mushrooms. And a lot of people are saying, was he honest and truthful in his application, in his visa application? You have to say, have you taken drugs? He said no, and then in Spare he said yes. So I think this is absolutely fascinating. They're saying they can't release these records because there is a stigma attached to law enforcement records. Yes, there's a stigma attached to that, but then don't say... everybody else, if you write yes on a visa application, you will be chucked out of the United States. You will be denied entry. So I think this is fascinating that on this issue of whether there is a stigma for Harry or not, he can have his law enforcement records not released into the public domain.
The bottom line is, do we want him back?
So what's interesting is it seems to be becoming a political dividing line in the States, because Biden is the administration trying to do Harry a favour by keeping them under wraps, but Trump has promised that he will, you know, that the file will be made public if he wins again.
Trump's been very strong on this. He said, you know, if Harry lied, then he's out.
The one thing about America is their politicians make ours look sane. Which is saying something.
I'm slightly confused about this whole story because, OK, sure, Prince Harry has said this. How many pop stars, rock stars, movie stars, like every
the difference is, well, I don't think it's just a British. I think millions of Brits, to be fair to them, lie on the form every year. Millions of people from around the world lie on the form every year. Not, of course.
I'm not going to name any pop star specifically, but I would be mightily surprised if any hadn't indulged in what.
Yes, but of course they haven't given written evidence in their biography that they have, and that's the difference.
Britain's election channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello everybody, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock alongside me. I've not kicked either of them out yet, so we're making good progress, everyone. The former Conservative MP, Sir Bill Cash, and the Labour life peer, Lord Glassman. Lots of appreciation for you two tonight. I want to say one of my viewers, Peter, I don't know if you're in Scarborough or if Scarborough's your surname, but he says the Labour Party, so-called party of the working class, has a problem. They support people who do not work, have no intentions of working, and contribute absolutely nothing to society. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, there's fairness to it. This is a long story, and I think that Brexit is a crucial part. Now we can actually be a sovereign polity. The politics is going to get more real.
Well,
and this is how it's going to go. And this conversation is not happening at this election, but I just want to honour the memory of a dear friend of us both, Frank Field, who went to the funeral 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And he was, you know, seriously thinking about the creation of mutuals, where bringing back the contributory principle. That's for social care, which we began with. That's also, and for other aspects. And I think that's really worth revisiting. So Labour has got to get closer and restore its relationship with working class people. That's for sure.
And Frank Field is a great friend of mine, and he was also a Brexiteer.
Yeah.
Well, there you go, and you can decide whether or not you think that if you are working class and you were once in the bosom of the Labour Party, can they nuzzle you back in there, or has that ship sailed? Give me your thoughts on that. Also today, I want to talk about something pretty serious, actually. Nigel Farage, he was in Clacton talking about his candidacy there. Did you see what happened? Some individual, they have, apparently someone's been arrested, so I need to be careful what I say, but someone launched a milkshake in his face. I can tell you now, I think that is pretty damn disgusting. However, there are many people absolutely celebrating this on social media because, you guessed it, they dislike the politics of Nigel Farage. I say shame on all of you that are celebrating that. We need better kind of politics, and we do, of course, live in a democracy. We are allowed to politically disagree. I also want to say in Clacton there are many candidates. We've invited them onto the programme should they so wish. Here is a list. Jovan Owanasu Nepal from the Labour Party, Giles Watling from the Tories, Matthew Benesalem from the Lib Dems, Nigel Farage from Reform UK, Natasha Obston from the Green Party. Of course, that candidate list isn't finalised and may change. Look, Sir Bill Cash mentioned a wonderful man at the start of this programme, Rob Burrow. He's very sadly passed away. You will be familiar with his story. He made a statement that he wanted us to listen to after he's very sadly passed. Here it is.
I hope one day we find a cure and live in a world free of enmity. By the time that you watch this, I will no longer be here. I am just a lad from Yorkshire who got to live out his dream of playing rugby league. As the father of 3 young children, I would never want any family to have to go through what my family and children have since my diagnosis. I hope I have left a mark on the disease. I hope it shows to live in the moment. I hope you find inspiration from the whole story. My final message to you is, whatever your personal battle, be brave and face it. Every single day is precious. Don't waste a moment. In a world full of adversity, we must still dare to dream.
Rob Borough, God bless you and all of your loved ones. Thank you, gents, for your company. God bless each of you also that's suffering with MND. I'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Some rain to come for parts of the southeast and the far northwest, but otherwise clear skies will develop this evening, and it's going to be a cold night. That's because this cold front is pushing south and eastwards through the rest of the evening, and behind it we've got much colder air arriving and clearer skies as well. So some rain at first this evening across the southeast, but it will turn much drier through the night. And I think most of us will see a dry and clear night away from the far northwest, where frequent, quite heavy showers will continue to push in through the night. It's going to be a much fresher start to the day tomorrow. We could be down into the low single figures rurally and the higher single figures for many towns and cities. But there will be a fair amount of sunshine around, particularly across eastern areas. So eastern Scotland could see a bright start to the day, but across the west there's a big difference across Scotland. Some frequent, very heavy, possibly thundery showers. There's a risk of some hail, possibly some hill snow across Scotland as well. Showers will continue to push into parts of northwest England, North Wales as well, but the further south and east you are, the more likely you are to stay dry through Wednesday. And I think it will stay fairly bright, particularly across the south coast into eastern areas of England as well through the day. There is a risk of the odd shower developing into more central areas of Wales, parts of the Midlands possibly by the afternoon, but it's really northern areas that will see the most frequent showers through Wednesday. But for most of us, it's going to be a much cooler day. Temperatures only reaching 11 or 12 degrees across northern areas, 16 or 17 across the south. It will still feel fairly pleasant in the sunshine across the south. But for many of us, a cold northwesterly breeze, and that will continue as we head into Thursday as well. Another very similar day, a fresh start with showers moving in from the north and west, staying much drier though across the south and the east. Still showers to come for northern areas on Friday, but by Saturday it looks much drier and brighter and a little bit warmer.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. The M80 in Falkirk is blocked in both directions, junction 8 to 9 between the M876 and the M9 interchange for a police investigation. The M6 is down to a single lane heading north through Cheshire still from junction 18 to 19 between Middlewich and Knutsford. Emergency repair works are still underway after 5 lorries were involved in an accident in the early hours. That queue is taking well over an hour and a half to get through, back to 17, and the entry slip road is also closed to junction 18 at the A54. Heading south of Birmingham city centre, the A38 is closed at Holloway Circus for a demonstration on Bristol Street, and the A1M is down to a single lane heading north through Hertfordshire again today, 6 to 7. Those emergency barrier repairs taking place about a mile north of the Welland bypass, and the clockwise M25 is being held through Kent near to the M26 coming into the roadworks at the scene of an accident. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
It's the Great British Summer Giveaway, and have we got a prize for you? There's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction, so you can enjoy amazing days out this year. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to